Yeah, sure.
Okay. So we'll start in a moment. While we're waiting, I think for the participants, please make sure to watch the film. It's a worthwhile film to watch, 24 days. Please watch it. I think it will come up in the sessions with your tutorial. So please watch it.
And one more reminder, please complete the daily survey. I'll include day 1 with day 2, but if maybe you just want to take notes on the side, we will be issuing out surveys every day for each speaker, and we appreciate that feedback.
Yeah, and we take your input very seriously, and we try to take the criticisms and the comments and incorporate it into the program and make it stronger for the future.
Also,
Okay.
there's on the last day, there's space for written notes. So if you want to keep those notes and include them on the last day of the survey, that works as well.
Cool. All right, so we're going to begin. So welcome back, everybody. I hope you had a good break. So we're going to start. So we have an important session now with 3 leading scholars in their area of research. I'll introduce everybody very briefly. The first speaker will be Professor Joël Kotek. Joel is a professor of political science at the Free University of Brussels and at the Institut d'études politiques de Paris. And he is a scholar on looking at the history of anti-Semitism as well as anti-Semitism in European cartoons. He'll be speaking, the title of his talk is The Myth of Judas as the Origin of Anti-Semitism. The next speaker will be Professor David Patterson. David is the Hillel Feinberg Chair in Holocaust Studies at the Ackerman Center for Holocaust Studies at the University of Texas at Dallas. He's a widely published leading scholar on issues of the Holocaust, on issues of philosophy, social theory, anti-Semitism in its various forms and guises. And he's a leading member of ISGAP. He's on the academic steering committee and a friend and mentor. The third, and David will be, this title of David's talk is Anti-Semitism from Hitler to Hamas. And the third and final speaker will be Professor Mohammed Dejani. Mohammed is the founder of the Wastia movement, and he's the director of the Wastia Graduate Academic Institute at Al-Quds University in Jerusalem. So we're privileged to have these 3 amazing scholars. And thank you for being here. And Joel, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much, Charles. And well, I enjoy to be with you, and I will try my best to speak in the format you give me, 20 minutes. It's quite short. So let's start. So I will speak about what I call anti-Semitism and the difference between anti-Semitism and anti-Judaism, which seems to be extremely important. Why? Because anti-Semitism doesn't tell us about Jews, but of course about society in crisis or in profound change. Anti-Semitism is a social disease, a collective psychosis, and of course the basic idea of anti-Semitism is the fact that Jews are considered as responsible of the woe of the world, and this is a big difference with commonplace racism. Anti-Semitism, as far as I understand it, is first and foremost a conspiracy theory, and that explain all the misfortunes of the world. The Jews explain all the misfortunes of the world, and this was a motto used by the Nazis during the 20s and the 30s. The fact that the Jews, die Juden sind unser Unglück, means the Jews are our misfortune. It's because of world Jewry or German Jewry that Germany was in so bad condition, etc. And then I will show you, because as Charles said, I'm a collector of cartoons, caricatures, etc. And this is a very nice cartoon made by actually a Russian Jew, Abel Pan, which explained the fact that of course, the Jews were blamed for the First World War. You see France accusing Germany, etc., accusing England, and then finally Serbia. And then, of course, everyone agrees that the Jews are responsible of the First World War, which is, of course, totally absurd. And the Jews is small, but of course, you will always, and this is, of course, the scapegoat theory, you will always accuse a very weak element of the society, and you will blame it. And this was really, you know, very easy. This was the task of the Jew, the role of the Jews, to explain the misfortune, and especially in the propaganda after the defeat of Austria and Germany after 1918, the fact that it was because of the world Jewry, the European Jewry, the Austrian German Jewry, that the German army was defeated finally by the Allies because they were stabbed in the back. And this is a very important legion, of course, totally absurd, but it served the cause of Nazi propaganda. And this is another, and there are many such cartoons, such postcards, which blamed the Jews for the defeat. It actually was the defeat of the German army. And the Jews were blamed for the First World War, but of course they were also blamed for the Second World War. And this is a cartoon, a poster made by the German in Serbia. And it's, of course, it explained the fact that it was the Jews who pushed Churchill and Stalin to prepare the war, and of course the Jews allied with the Mason, etc. So the Jews makes possible, and this is the role of the Jews in Western society. It means they justify the existence of the evil. This is the role they have in the collective mentality. And this was yesterday, as I show, it means the First World War, the Second World War, but today it's not different. This is an illustration made by an American illustrator of today, you know, not yesterday, but he's called David Dees, and David Dees tried to explain us, to convince us that the immigration, the Muslim, the Black immigration, whether in the States or in Europe, is the responsibility not of the Jews, of course, but of the Zionists. It means the Zionists that try to destroy the white race through Muslim and Black immigration. Of course, it's absurd, but by definition, you know, it's a psychosis, it's a social disease. Of course, it's absurd, but unfortunately, it works. It means the Jews makes it possible to justify the what went wrong. And we witness it also through the coronavirus crisis. And there were many cartoons, many posters, many illustrators who tried to convince us that COVID-19 was a Jewish plot, a plot whether to destroy, it means the white race, or just to make profit, etc. It was true in the States, it was true in Germany, but also in France. And for instance, this is a cartoon against Agnès Buzyn. Agnès Buzyn was then French Minister of Health, and of course she was accused of, causing the coronavirus in France. You can see, and this is really a medieval myth, legend, trope. You know, like she is like poisoning the well. So, what is anti-Semitism? As far as I understand it, anti-Semitism is a cultural code, because it can also strike society without Jews. Because you don't need Jews to blame the Jews, because it's just a concept. Jews responsible of what went wrong, and this was in anti-Semitism in a sense could be quite funny, because it's so absurd. And this is, of course, I found it on Memory, and it's on the Egyptian TV. It's a debate, and one claimed that the Jewish plot was to decrease the Egypt population. And the political science sociologist claims, on the contrary, that the plot was to increase it. So whatever the reality is, the idea is always to blame the Jews. And even in Japan, and I say, in a sense, it's so strange, so absurd, that in a sense it's you consider as funny, because in 1979, not a real historian, a pseudo historian, Japanese historian, but actually he wrote a book, spread the rumor that there was a Jewish responsibility of Hiroshima, and that Enola Gay, which was actually the name of the pilot, means in reality, kill the emperor in Yiddish. So you can see, and there are maybe 2,000 Jews in Japan. So how would you explain it? So the idea is that the Jews are the misfortune of the world. This is really the cultural code. And what I try, because I'm an historian more than a political scientist, this idea that the Jews are responsible of the woes, of the misfortune, of the catastrophe that could occur anywhere, this dates back in the 11th century, in the Middle Age. Even if the word anti-Semitism was created in the 19th century, as we know, the reality, it means, what really means Jews being responsible of the misfortune of the world, this is a medieval idea. It was indeed in the Middle Age that it means anti-Judaism, which was then the reality between the relation between the Christian society and the Jews, was transformed into anti-Semitism. And which, as an historian, I emphasize always that you shouldn't confuse between anti-Judaism and anti-Semitism. Why? Well, anti-Judaism is a rational opposition. Anti-Judaism condemns Judaism for what it is, a rival, and besides the matrix face. You cannot understand Christianity if you don't read the Torah. All the myths that, you know, are concerned Christianity are based on, you know, the Torah, etc., the concept of, for instance, Messiah, Apocalypse, whatsoever. And in anti-Judaism, the Jews are blamed for what they are. People opposing here the sanctity of Christ, they're of Muhammad, etc. And so the fact that they are despised for what they do, for the real difference, they pray on Shabbat in a synagogue and not in Friday in a mosque or in Sunday in a church. They celebrate Passover, Pesach, respect Yom Kippur, and not Lent or Ramadan, etc. And then in anti-Judaism, the quarrel is, of course, theological. And in a sense, you can say logical, because, you know, monotheism is quite, it's quite intolerant, if you understand. There is only one way, you know, to go to the paradise, etc. So if you consider anti-Judaism, you will see that Saint Augustine, you know, credo is the fact that, in a sense, Jew is a necessary evil, an error in the service of truth. And in the 4th century, Saint Augustine wrote that Jews should not be killed, but condemned to dispersion and humiliation as a sign of the church victory of the synagogue. And so it means that, well, they are condemned to eternal servitude, but then an annihilation is not advocated by the father of the church, and there is a possible salvation, and the salvation is the conversion. And if you can see in the traditional presentation of the Middle Age, in the medieval period, you will see the synagogue represented as a human being. You know, the synagogue there, she's a human being, but in the error. You know, she's blind. The Torah doesn't seem to be so important, and the alliance between God and the Jews, it's broken. It's, you know, you can see it, but still salvation is possible. And this is, I would say, the relation between the Jews and the Christian and the Jews till the Crusades. Everything will change around the 12th and 13th century, especially with the Crusades, etc. And so then, and this is the essence, the birth of what is called now anti-Semitism, then the hatred of the Jews, born, of course, in the wake of the Crusaders, of course, is still religious inspired, but distinguished itself from it by its totally irrational side. The hatred, it's no more doctrinal, but I would say of fantastical order. And so what is anti-Semitism compared to anti-Judaism? Anti-Semitism is an invention. Then the Jews are not hatred for what they are, but for what they do not are, for what they are not. It means evil creature, they're not, but they are considered then as evil creature with murderous practices, poisoning wells, killing children, spreading diseases like the plague, etc. And it's in the Middle Age then the Jews became responsible of the misfortune of the world. It means 12th century and not 19th century. And this is, of course, a major cultural shift. During the High Middle Age in Europe, there were full-scale persecution in many places with blood libel, massacre, forced conversion, etc. We know it. The Crusaders will kill 10,000s of Jews, especially along the Rhine, etc. And remember the Black Death epidemics, the Jews will be blamed. And a lot of Jewish community will be destroyed, being accused of being responsible of the Black Death. And this is, representation that you will find, whether in Germany, in England, and this is, for instance, in Belgium, etc. And they will be also accused of very strange, accusation, like the blood libel and ritual crime, the fact that the Jews, they needed to kill children for religious purpose. And this myth actually explained today the fact that the Israeli-Palestinian conflicts is the only conflict where people that they will speak about how many children the Israeli army has killed during this war, etc. This is a reminiscence of this absurd accusation. So to go back to my presentation, how could we explain this? How could we explain the fact that the shift between anti-Judaism to anti-Semitism? The fact that the rational, it means explanation, the hatred, which in a sense was rational between the Jews and the Christian, as I said, anti-Judaism and anti-Semitism. And so the matrix is the deicide or the Judah myth, etc. The deicide or the myth of Judah announce anti-Semitism, etc. Because deicide is an invention of reality, of course. I can say, in a sense, it's the first fake news of the history of humanity. It's the Romans who were responsible of Jesus' death, definitely not the Jews, but the Jews will be blamed from it. Because if you will see a representation of the last dinner of Jesus, but everyone is a Jew. There are no non-Jew. Jesus was a Jew, all his friends were Jews, etc. And I would say the genius of the father of the church will be to take one of them, name him Judah, it means Jews, and make him responsible of his death. And this is really an invention which actually will explain the fact that the Jews will be blamed for, of course, the worst crime that could ever exist, the death of the God. And this is a representation. You will see in the Christian, of course, painting that Jesus will resemble more and more as a so-called Aryan. Of course, it doesn't exist as European, and the Jews more and more as a Semite, etc. And this is, I will try almost to finish. Let me give you 5 minutes more. But this is a representation of the Middle Age, and you see what it means. The crucifixion. It means the fact that Jesus was given to Ponce Pilate already as a conspiracy. You will see the Jews selling Christ to Ponce Pilate, who actually seems to be a Jew, because he wear the Jewish hat. And what do they do this? Why did the Sanhedrin give Jesus? For money. So in a sense, you can see that the deicide is already interpreted as a Jewish conspiracy for money. And everything is then will be, in a sense, a commentary of it. And you will see in the next presentation, in the next, eliminator, that, the Jews will be blamed and will be, represented in a very strange way, who looks a little bit like, I will say, the traditional anti-Semite cartoons of the French 19th century period, even Nazi period. Look how the Jews looks like. Look how Ponce Pilate looks like. They're Jews. They looks like almost inhuman person, etc., compared to Jesus, etc. So the Jews will be blamed, and this is how Judah is represented. And then you can see the difference of representation between a Jew in an anti-Semite, reality. The Jews is no more human. He sell his soul to the devil, the soul being represented as a young man, as a baby, etc. And the only way for him to save is not by convert, but by kill himself, by suicide. And you know that in the Christian tradition, Judah killed himself, etc. So it means, and this is really the matrix, you can see that the Jews are doomed because their self, their soul to the devil. And all the rest, I would say, is almost commentary of this. So, and it's this cultural code, you know, which will finally lead by a torturous and complex process to the Nazi anti-Semitism, and finally to, I would say today, radical anti-Zionism, etc. And it means that the Jew will be considered as the ideal scapegoat, and this is a representation of Captain Dreyfus in France. And of course, it didn't look like this, Captain Dreyfus, but he is represented as a Judas. He sell, you know, to Germany, plan of a new cannon for money. This is really a reminiscence of, you know, the plot that the Jew did 2,000 years before. It means the Jews are responsible for what went wrong, being responsible of, you know, the terrible situation of the Russian peasantry, etc. Then you will see the myth of Judeo-Massonism, etc. The Jews who are responsible of wars, the Jews responsible of the revolution of in Russia, etc. And then Judaism equal modernity, equal evil, equal plot, and this explains, of course, the protocol of elders of science, the Jews, you know, plotting against the world to destroy, I would say, Christianity or Christian civilization, Western civilization, etc. And it's true in Europe. It's also true in the United States, because, and you can see that it doesn't concern the Jews itself, but it's really a confusion between Jews and modernity, because in these cartoons, Jews are responsible of what? Of democracy, of Wall Street, of republicanism, etc. And this is, I would say, a definition of, I would say, modernity. And this is also a postcard which was actually printed by white Russians, etc. And they say, look, we emancipate the Jews, and how did they thank us? By giving us Bolshevism, communism, socialism, feminism, propaganda, finance, unionism, etc., and cinema and press. And you can see, of course, that it doesn't concern the Jews. It's just, I would say, an anti-modern speech against. And unfortunately, the Jews will be considered as Weltparasite by the Nazi, etc. And up to today, and I will finish with this, I'm always within my time. And you can see that radical anti-Zionism, you know, in a sense, it's the continuation of this, I would say, medieval accusation. The Zionist Jews are hatred not for what they do or really are, nation between the nation, etc., but for what they do not are. It means they do not do. It means they do not kill children. They are not evil creatures with murderous practice, controlling capitalism system, etc., poisoning people like Arafat, killing systematically Palestinian children, etc. And today, Israeli became those responsible of the misfortune of the world. So I would say it's the continuation of the cultural code which was created in Middle Age. And this is another illustration of David Dees. EU multiculturalism is white genocide. And who is responsible of this? The Zionist Jew agenda, etc., uses massive illegal immigration in US and EU to neutralize and destroy the white race. It's absurd. And the same with this. This is a cartoon of Macron, and Macron being represented as a creature of the Rothschild, etc. On one side, he has the Rothschild badge, on the other side, a Freemason, etc. And, you know, he is responsible of the coming of migration from Africa, etc. And so I will finish here, but it means that considering this, Jews, you will blame the Jews, and you will, and even of course, even today in the Arabic world, everyone will be considered as a Jew, any opponent, etc. And this is, you know, Gaddafi being described as a Jew, Morsi being described as a Jew, Al-Sisi being described as a Jew, denounced as a Jew, another Al-Sisi, even Assad, you know, and even in Tunisia, Ranesh Ghanouchi depicted as a Jew, as far as, of course, by his opposition. So, and then, of course, ISIS, you know, al-Baghdadi being described as a Jewish agent of the Mossad. So it means evil by definition is a Jewish conspiracy, etc. And it was the case of Alexis Tsipras. And to finish with Tony Blair, they spy as a satanic racist Jew war criminal. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Joel. It's, as always, a very rich and complex story that you portray. So we'll have Q&A after. So thank you very much, Joel. And then the next speaker is David Patterson. David, the floor is yours for about 20 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to speak about Hamas. Hamas is at least a word that many people are familiar with, but I would suggest that not so many know much about. Hamas has received words of support from highly respected academic organizations, such as the ones you see on the screen, but what exactly are the intellectuals supporting in their support of Hamas? Where is, what are they supporting? Hamas has direct connections and indirect connections to the Nazis. This is an image of one of their kites used to carry incendiary devices from Gaza and into Israel. They have, links in to the Nazis in their teachings. Hitler regards anything written in the protocols of the Elders of Zion as holy writ, as does the Hamas Charter of Allah. The Charter of Allah invokes three kinds of texts to prove the truth of the Charter. It invokes the Quran, it invokes texts from the Hadith, and it invokes the protocols of the Elders of Zion. The protocols has become kind of the new scripture for Jew hatred. And the pivotal key in the link here is, if you had to point to one person, is Haj Amin al-Husseini. Al-Husseini was wanted by the British, tried and convicted in absentia by the British for inciting riots in Palestine in 1920. As an act of appeasement, on May 8th, 1921, Herbert Samuel appointed al-Husseini as the Mufti of Jerusalem, whereupon al-Husseini declared a jihad against the British and the Jews. On the 31st of March, al-Husseini, 31st of March, 1933, al-Husseini had his first meeting with the new German consul Heinrich Wolf in Jerusalem. March 31st, 1933, was 2 months after Hitler was appointed Chancellor of Germany. By March 31st, 1933, Dachau was in operation. The Nazis gave him financial assistance. In fact, the Nazis helped to finance the Arab Revolt, which extended from 1936 to 1939. During the Arab Revolt and before al-Husseini was known as the Mufti, as the spiritual leader of Palestine for the Muslims. He was known to preach that killing Jews is a holy act, pleasing to Allah. Whoever kills a Jew has a guaranteed place in paradise. So it's the blood of a Jew becomes your ticket to life eternal. In 1937, October 2nd, 1937, al-Husseini met with Eichmann in Palestine. Eichmann and Eichmann's colleague, Herbert Hagen. Some argue that maybe Eichmann was not at the meeting, but in any case, it's known that Eichmann wanted to meet with al-Husseini. However, this is October 2nd, 1937. On October 13th, 11 days later, al-Husseini had to flee Palestine as he was once again wanted for inciting riots in the Arab Revolt. Meanwhile, back in Egypt, this is another crucial development to the link between Hitler and Hamas. Okay? In March 1928, Hassan al-Banna and 5 others with him of his cohorts founded the Muslim Brotherhood. And as Charles pointed out yesterday, this is in the context of a British colonial presence in Egypt, but it's also in the context of the Zionist movement taking place in British Palestine. Now, this is the creed. You know, Allah is our goal. The Prophet is our leader. The Quran is our law. Jihad is our way. Jihad becomes like a 6th pillar of Islam. Jihad is incumbent on every Muslim. Zakat, giving charity to jihadist movements, is part of what is necessary to enter paradise if you can't actually fight and die in the service of Allah. Inflicting death, not just undergoing death here. Al-Banna was a great admirer of Hitler. For Al-Banna, Hitler confirmed that Zionism is not about establishing a haven or a homeland for the imperiled Jews of Europe. No, Zionism is about establishing a base of operations. This is a statement made in Mein Kampf. That was made earlier than Mein Kampf by Alfred Rosenberg, one of the chief Nazi ideologues, in 1922. So Al-Banna has his eyes opened by Hitler, and he also says that Hitler taught him the importance of propaganda. One of the things he did as the head of the Brotherhood was to establish a propaganda wing. Hitler taught him that the aim of propaganda is certainly not to inform, and it's not even to persuade. The purpose of propaganda, in Hitler's words, is to incite wrathful hatred. It's to incite hatred of the Jews. Hatred of the Jews as the embodiment of evil, okay? So for Al-Banna, for Haj Amin al-Husseini, the premise is not that all Jews are evil. No, it's that all evil is Jewish. The elimination of the Jew carries with it a redemptive imperative. It's for the sake of salvation. In 1938, the Brotherhood hosted a parliamentary conference for Arab and Muslim countries in Cairo. At that conference, they handed out Arabic translations of portions of Mein Kampf and Arabic translations of the Protocols of the Elders of Zion. The protocols appeared in Arabic as early as 1922. And certainly by 1926, the text was in circulation. The Brotherhood was a supporter of the Nazis during the war. Anwar Sadat was arrested by the British as a Nazi spy in 1943. So you have this connection between al-Husseini and the Nazis, the Brotherhood and the Nazis. Back to al-Husseini, when al-Husseini fled Palestine, he went into hiding in various places. He turned up in 1941 in Iraq on April 3rd, 1941, with the backing of the Nazis. In fact, al-Husseini was on Nazi payroll by this time. He was among those who incited a coup against the British-backed Iraqi government. The British suppressed that revolt in Iraq by the end of May 1941. But before he left, al-Husseini incited this riot against the Jews of Baghdad, June 1st, 1941, known as the Farhud. Of course, he fled. I should also mention that the Assyrian Christians in Iraq helped the Jews during the Farhud, something not widely known. So he fled. He's once again fled. He turned up on November 28th in Berlin, where he had his first meeting with Hitler. He commented on that meeting in his memoirs by saying, the following, what you see here. Our fundamental conditions for cooperating with Germany was a free hand to eradicate every last Jew from Palestine and the Arab world. I asked Hitler for an explicit undertaking to allow us to solve the Jewish problem in a manner befitting our national and racial aspirations and according to the scientific methods innovated by Germany. And the answer I got was, the Jews are yours. Al-Husseini developed close relations with heads of the SS, with Rudolf Höss, commandant of Auschwitz, with Franz Zieres, Mauthausen commandant, Josef Kramer, commandant of Belsen. But the one al-Husseini was closest with in the SS was Himmler himself. Working with Himmler, al-Husseini worked to organize SS killing units in the Balkans, consisting entirely of Muslims, mostly Muslims from the Balkans, not from the Arab world. It's estimated that as many as 100,000 were recruited by al-Husseini and fought with the Nazis. That may be, it strikes me as perhaps a little high, but in any case, there were Muslim killing units organized by al-Husseini, the largest of which is the infamous Hanshar division, more than 21,000 men. And here we see al-Husseini reviewing the troops of the Hanshar. Right behind him is Carl Gustav Zauberzweig, who reported that the Muslims see in the Fuhrer a kind of second prophet, the mission of the second prophet. By the end of the war, al-Husseini was wanted as a Nazi war criminal. He turned up in Cairo on June 20th, 1946, where al-Banna gave him a hero's welcome. He had already, of course, been tied to the Brotherhood, and he connected the Brotherhood with the Nazis. The Brotherhood sent delegations to Nuremberg in the 1930s for their rallies. So he also linked up with Sayyid Qutb. Sayyid Qutb is certainly the most influential ideologue of the Muslim Brotherhood. His works are read throughout the jihadist world. The Ayatollah Khomeini was famous Qutbist, translated his work into Farsi. So his fundamental teaching about Qutb is, again, this demonization of the Jews, Judaism, the Jewish state, so that the extermination of the Jews becomes a defining feature of the jihadist worldview, and a religious imperative, something holy and pleasing to God. One of the most devoted followers of Qutb was Ahmed Yassin. Ahmed Yassin, who founded Hamas on December 9th, 1987. Ahmed Yassin suggested at the time, he said, our slogan is that killing Israelis, killing Jews, is an act of devotion. It's not an unpleasant necessity. It's not to get rid of the occupiers. It's to purge and purify the world of evil. Now, who is Hamas? They tell you in their charter. And if you want to say, well, they revised that, nothing in the so-called revision contradicts anything in the charter.
David, I'm sorry to interrupt. You have about 3 or 4 minutes left. Thank you.
Okay, I'll just run through a couple of things. The charter, this is a passage from the Hadith. So you see that there's an apocalyptic mission in killing the Jews. There's no solution except by killing the Jews. As it is written in the Hadith, I will assault and kill, assault and kill, assault and kill. The Jews are, again, they're not just a political enemy, they are a moral, spiritual enemy in a fight between Satan and God. And Islam is the agent, and the enemy is Israel, Judaism, and Jews. It's not just the Israelis. It's Israel, Judaism, and Jews. Of course, their plan is outlined in the protocols, and their plan is to rule the world, to destroy the world. Now, lest you suppose that this is about Israelis beating up on Gaza, an Egyptian sheikh, Muhammad Hussein Yaqub, explained that, you know, if the Jews left Palestine to us, would we start loving them? No, of course not. The Jews are infidels, not because I say so, but because Allah says so. They are enemies, not because they've occupied Palestine. They would be enemies if they didn't occupy a thing. Our fighting with the Jews is eternal until not a single Jew remains on the face of the earth. It isn't about occupation. It isn't about settlements. It isn't about Gaza. It isn't about, you know, security fences or anything else. There is a difference, I think, in the Nazi and the jihadist. The Nazi sets out to usurp God, declaring that the word of the Fuhrer was law. The jihadist appropriates God, taking itself to speak for God. The charter of Hamas is called Charter of Allah. So the Hamas is Allah. I'll end with Hitler's last words. The last words that Hitler wrote before he committed suicide, hours before he committed suicide, was to enjoin the world to resist mercilessly the poisoner of all nations, international Jewry. And it seems to me one area where you see a large numbers, organized, systematic numbers of peoples in a profound and deep and serious movement of following. It's in the jihadist movement. It's in the movement from the Brotherhood, which is the source really of most of the jihadist organizations now. They can be traced back. They have answered the call of Hitler. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, David. And of course, we're going to have a Q&A in about 20 minutes. The next speaker is Professor Mohammed Dajani. He's speaking on combating anti-Semitism in the Muslim world. Mohammed, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for inviting me. It's a very rich discussion and lectures. I will start with a story that happened with me about a few years ago. I was invited to attend a conference in South Africa at the University of Johannesburg. And the conference was about reconciliation. There were Israelis invited to the conference, around 15 from different Israeli universities. And the BDS in South Africa demonstrated and started writing letters to the organizers about against the Israeli participants and pressuring them and putting and threatening. So the organizers decided in order not to lose the conference, which was more than 200 people were invited from international places. So they decided they would sacrifice the presence of the Israelis, and so that to save the conference. And so they wrote a letter to the Israelis to apologize to them. Now, that was a very odd and very weak, and let us say step, because it was an academic, the conference was academic, and they should have stood up for the sake of, but they were afraid. Now, one of the arguments that the BDS, South African BDS raised was, you are inviting 15 Israelis, but you are not inviting Palestinians. So there is an imbalance in this, and that's one of the reasons why this conference should be closed or should not go on if the Israelis will participate. Now, the organizers responded by saying, well, Professor Mohammed Dejani is a speaker, is a key speaker, and these are Palestinians. The BDS responded, no, he is not a Palestinian, he is not a genuine Palestinian. So they considered me, because I'm calling for peace, for reconciliation, that I'm not a genuine Palestinian. Now, the problem is, my response to them was, don't import our conflict to you, export to us the rainbow of Nelson Mandela. And the problem also that they were boycotting, they wanted to boycott, and they resulted in the expulsion of Israelis who were coming to discuss peace and reconciliation, and who have written a lot of articles about peace, about the rights of Palestinians, about end of occupation. And so they made no distinction between those who are pro-occupation and those who are anti-occupation, who are those who delegitimize, demonize, and do not recognize the Palestinians as a people or their rights, and those who do among the Israelis. Now, if we look at this and then reflect the picture on the other side. Now, the problem is BDS and others, now when they talk about Israel, they also never mention or never make a distinction between the pro-peace camp and the pro-conflict camp, between those who are for ending the occupation, for peace, and for those who consider the occupation to be part of normal part of Israel. And there are no Palestinians, and they do not have any rights. And so here, this is part of the problem that we have. Looking at the Palestinians in one way as a full package in which all Palestinians are terrorists or all Palestinians are anti-Israel, and looking at Israel also as a package, that it is all are, if you criticize if you criticize Israel, you are anti-Semitic. Now, this is part of the problem that we have. We need to redefine again what is anti-Semitism, because in the past, the definition was very simple. It was about being prejudiced to Jews, as a religion. It has its roots in being anti-Christian, being anti-Jesus. It had its Christian roots, but it was the simple way of defining it. And that's where the prejudice against Jews became in Europe, mostly. But initially, it was against Jews as Jews. And that's part of the evilness of it. Now, in modern times, when Israel was established, and then there was Zionism, and then Israel established, and now in modern times, there is a linkage between Israel and anti-Zionism. So, for instance, if a Ben & Jerry company boycotts the settlements and products of the settlements, it is considered anti-Semitic and a crime against humanity. But missing in the picture that there is occupation. And in this way, I believe the anti-Semitism is empowered by adding something which is immoral, which is the occupation of other people's land, and not recognizing their rights, and delegitimizing and demonizing them, to what is considered to be anti-Semitism. So here, this is part of the issue, part of the problem. Like BDS is making the fault or the error of building, of having this boycott targeting Israel as a whole without any distinction, and making it religious, sounding religious rather than political, then that's part of the problem. Because here, BDS claims it is a political action against Israel as an occupying power and to end the occupation. But many Zionist affiliates infiltrated the BDS and tried to mix between both. And so they target Israel. Notice that when the Arabs were boycotting Israel after 1948, till recent times, it was not linked to anti-Semitism, the boycott. That's where it was linked to the Arab-Israeli conflict, to politics. And that's here, we have to make a distinction when we are talking about anti-Semitism between what is religious and targeting Jews as a religious faith and as a religious people, and Israel as a Jewish state, and what is targeting the politics that resulting from it. Because you cannot mix the good with the bad. You cannot mix the heart of evil with the heart of stone, with the heart of gold, and with the heart of flesh. You cannot mix them all together and bundle them and treat them as one unity. No, you have to distinguish between those with heart of evil, with heart of stone, and those with heart of flesh and heart of gold. Same thing with Israel. There are within Israel, there are those with heart of gold. There is Israel as a light to nations, and there is the darkness in it, and you should not mix both. And this is where anti-Semitism is not served in mixing the politics and the religious. And that's where it is very important to be able to understand what is going on. I was hearing the lecture, and that it was very interesting. But yes, Haj Jamil Husseini, he was pro-Hitler, and sometimes he was appointed to start with by the British. And despite he has no qualifications to be appointed as a mufti, he's not religious. And yet, when there is the narrative, there is the other narrative, that in Iraq, he was the one who actually, he was the one who spied on the Iraqi plot against the British, gave the information to the British in order to undermine, and then even in his visit to Germany, the Palestinian, there is a Palestinian narrative that says it was being a British spy that he went there, and that's why he was rewarded by, when the war was over, that he was delivered safely without being tried to Egypt, and then which was under the Egyptian authority, and then Later, when the Egyptians and the British were at odds, they moved him to Lebanon. He was a murderer. He murdered my cousin, Ahmad Dijani, for nothing but because he was opposed to his politics, because he's an extremist. And not only did he murdered many Palestinian intellectuals who opposed his radical policies. So to build the whole narrative about him, to link the Palestinians to the Nazis, it is, I think, it is not in the right direction. And even we have in Palestine, the president of Palestine has written a book about the connection between the Nazis and Zionism. And so here, it is the other side. It is called The Other Side, the book. And this is by Mahmoud Abbas, and it talks the serious relations between Nazism and Zionism. So this is not in the right direction. We need to see what needs to be done. Within the Arab world, yes, there are many anti-Semitic literature. This is part of the culture, but it is also related to Palestine, to the conflict in Palestine. And for instance, we have a very popular, the Protocol of the Elders of the Zion. Can you imagine what a thick book it is? And not only this one, there are hundreds of issues of books about it. Also, we have books about Nazis, and one of the popular books that we have is Mein Kampf, translated to Arabic in different versions. Yes, this is the dark side of the culture. But if we keep focusing on the dark side of the culture, there is no hope. Because in this dark side of culture, we also have the considering the Holocaust as a lie. And this is a book, my story with the lie of the Holocaust. And these are what is being published in the Arab world. And this is what is being read in the Arab world. And what is being read about the Holocaust is the negative side. Yes. And this is the Holocaust, the reverse Holocaust. And it says that how Jews killed 80,000 Germans and tortured 3 million more. This is the literature that is being circulated. And how much is this book? Then $2, $3. And so that's what people read. And that's why we should not blame them for what they think, because this is the culture they are in. And in this part, now we have to see how to solve this problem, how to fight anti-Semitism, how to challenge this. Now, yes, there is in the Quran, there is two interpretations. There is the radical Hamas Muslim Brotherhood interpretation of the Quran, and there is the moderate Islamic Wasatiyya interpretation. Now, all that was said about the Muslim Brotherhood, about the Al-Banna and others, true, because this is how they interpret the Quran. They interpret it very negatively. Everything in the Quran that they interpret is against Jews, against Christians, and they claim that Islam came to replace Judaism and Christianity, not to complement them. And that's what they teach the children in the schools. That's the curriculum. And that's what we are fighting against, because this is not true Islam. Islam did not come to replace other religions, but to complement them. It came in Arabia, where people were worshiping more than 400 deities. And it did not come in Jerusalem to challenge Christianity and Judaism. And so it came in an area where it is to spread the word of God. And this is where in the Quran they take verses, like for instance, Al-Fatiha, and they say, Al-Fatiha says in the last 3 verses, guide us to the right path the path of those whom you have blessed, not those who incurred your anger, nor those who are lost. So they take that verse instead of interpreting the verse in the Quranic context, that the blessed are the rightful, the faithful, whether Jews, Christians, or Muslims, and those who incurred God's anger are the infidels who are anti-Jews, anti-Christian, anti-Islam, anti-God, and the lost are the hypocrites in between. Yet they come to say that, to interpret it to say, those who incurred God's anger are the Jews, those who are blessed are the Muslims, and those who are lost are the Christians. Even in many verses within the Quran, they do that. But does that mean Islam? Does that mean this is the right way? No. This is part of the religious war against Judaism, against Christianity by extremist Muslims. And we find the same thing with the other religions, with Christianity and Judaism, when they are attacking Islam. And there are rabbis who say that the Palestinians are mosquitoes, or that there is no Palestinians, or kill them. So we do not want to stress this negativity within the culture, whether in any culture. We would like to stress for how can we build a better future? And the only way we can build a better future is to have an interfaith dialogue. Yes, there are lots of ignorance, but the ignorance, we cannot blame the ignorance on that education, high education does not make one challenge anti-Semitism. Yes, I had 2 MAs, 2 PhDs, supposedly highly educated, and I knew nothing about the Holocaust. And I was even on the link of being anti-Semitic. But why? Because I never studied the Holocaust. I never studied Judaism. I never studied what does Judaism mean? What does it refer to? What does it stand for? And then when I learned more about the Holocaust, I then turned to believe in it and turn to wanting others to see it from the right way, so that they will search for what is right, what is the truth. And this is part of education. But it should be education, specialized education. In the Holocaust, we cannot say he is highly educated, yet he is anti-Semitic. Yes, he is anti-Semitic because he is ignorant of Semitism, of what the Jews stand for. Yes, it is not the success that because Jews are successful, people had them. That might be, but it is not the answer. Nor is the answer that it is because Jews are everywhere, because people are everywhere, or because there is variety. The answer is in the light that sheds, that comes out. I believe that when a Jewish doctor tried to save my mother from death, I saw the good in him, and I started to be supportive of him and of his cause. But if the good in people brings out the good in others, the evil in people brings out the evil in others. So people who criticize Israel do not criticize Israel. If they criticize Israel because it's Jewish, okay, that's wrong, totally wrong. And you should say it is anti-Semitic. But if they criticize the occupation, if they criticize Israel bombing, if they criticize Israel imprisonment, if they criticize Israeli illegal behaviors, you call them anti-Semitic, I think you are in the wrong place. And that's where I want today to reflect the devil's advocate, to reflect the other side of the coin, because we can hear a lot, but yet we have to understand, we have to put ourselves in the shoes of the other. Now, if you put yourself in the shoes of the Palestinian is mixed between his anti-Zionism and anti-Jewish, and sometimes they cross. And people may not understand that they are being anti-Jewish when they are being too anti-Semitic, when they are being also anti-Zionist. And when they call for the demonization of Israel, they are being anti-Semitic. When they call for delegitimization of Israel or the Jewish people, they are anti-Semitic. But if they are calling, if they are criticizing, or if they are talking about injustice that befell them, and you call them anti-Semitic because of that, you are in the wrong place, not them. And that's where you should move, and you should take a better view of the other and a better view of things, of what is Judaism. Most of what I learned about Judaism found out that it is that we are learning it as part of Islam. And so there is a linkage, there are common values between us, and that's what should link us. And that's where in the fight for anti-Semitism, it also should be linked to the fight with Islamophobia, because we should stand together against prejudice, against evil, against the wrongdoers. Unless we unify ourselves, we cannot reach anywhere, and we will not win this war. And the other will become much more powerful and much more stronger. And that's where in unity, we can build a better place. We can fight it. And the way we can fight it is to try to promote, in Islam, that's what we are doing, trying to promote the wasatiyya concept, in which to fight anti-Semitism, to fight anti-Jewish interpretation, to fight anti-Christian interpretation of the Quran, of the Hadith. Yes, I wrote an article about the quotation for the Hadith that was mentioned, in which Jews and the Muslims will fight, and then Muslims will win the war, the battle. And it is part of the mythologies. It's not a Hadith. It's not a true Hadith. Yeah, and this is from the Christian mythologies, where Jesus, there was the prodigal, the impostor Jesus, the impostor comes and fights, and then the faithful fights against him, and this is the word that's being mentioned there. So I wrote an article that cited 35 verses from the Quran against this hadith. And the hadith that does not fit within the Quran is not a true hadith. Hamas, yes, has it in its charter, but that's wrong. It doesn't mean this is Islam. It means this is the radical Islam, not a moderate Islam, not Islam, not the true Islam, because there is nothing in the Quran that says that we have to kill Jews. On the contrary, it praises Jews in many of the verses. There are 66 verses in the Quran that talks about Jews, and most of them, and when it criticizes, it doesn't criticize Judaism, it criticizes behavior of some Jews who made their calf of gold, and when Moses went to speak to God, then they went to worship that calf. And so they criticize those Jews, not Jews as all Jews. And so that's where we have to build bridges between Christianity, Judaism, and Islam, and to try to understand the religion, not from the radical perspective, but from the moderate perspective. What is the true Islam? And I learned a lot from Jewish scholars, and I learned a lot from Jewish wisdom. It is true that people do not like the winner, do not like successful people. This is part of nature. And so the Jews are much advanced in their in what they do than others. It is true. And in this way, there are people they may target them as such, but not because they are Jews, but because they are successful, whether they are Jews, whether they are Christians, or whether they are Muslims. This is part of nature, of human nature. And that's where my message today is, let us focus on on shedding a light, whether from Christianity, Judaism or Islam. Let us work with the shared values that we have. Let us try to build a better future by teaching our children how they can be better people than us, how their should be heart of gold, not like us. We are not heart of gold. We are raised in an age that is not really pro humanity or pro peace. And so that's actually, I'm sorry that if I seem to be radical or not moderate, although I am supposed to be moderate, but yet people would see what I say, that it is on the fringes. It's not. It is part of, we need to tackle these taboos, and we have to stand up to them. And part of my struggle in this life has been to stand up against taboos, whether it is the taboo that America is evil, or the taboo that the Holocaust is a lie, or the taboo that Jews are hated by God, or the taboo that we are better than others. And this is where we need to move on and hope that we can hold hands, unify our efforts in order to build a better future. And we cannot build this better future if we are all divided. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Professor Dejani. So thank you, Joel, David, and Mohammed, very much for your insights. I think Joel tried to capture in a very short period of time the depth and magnitude of anti-Semitism in European civilization. David took it a step forward to look at the link between European civilization and its impact on the reactionary social movement, the development of the Muslim Brotherhood, and focusing on Hamas, an offshoot of the Brotherhood. And Professor Dejani spoke eloquently about the need to, I guess, get beyond this period of division and hatred. So very powerful lectures. I would like to take the prerogative of the chair and ask the first question and push back a little bit. I think David's presentation on Hamas and the Muslim Brotherhood is particularly of importance to us as scholars. At ISGAP, we did a research project that showed that over $3 billion of Muslim Brotherhood funding has gone to American universities. Here at Oxford University, the Islamic Studies Center was actually started by the director of the Board of Trustees. The head of the Muslim Brotherhood, Yosef Kawadawi, helped to start it. Muslim Brotherhood funding at British and European and American and Canadian universities is substantial, and we're arguing that this has had an impact on the discourse in academia. And this is some of the work that the research that we're doing. I think Professor Dejani showed that the Protocols of the Elders of Zion and Mein Kampf is prevalent in Arabic publications and literature. We showed, Professor Patterson showed the link between Husseini and Nazism, and which I did not know. It's interesting how the British appointed him. Professor Dejani spoke about how the British appointed him as somebody who was, according to Professor Dejani, unqualified to be the Mufti of Jerusalem, but was appointed. There is a legacy of the British working with the more radical reactionary elements of Muslim societies, the Middle Eastern societies, and even in the British context, among the British Muslim community, there's been an empowerment of the more radical elements in the community, which is fascinating. So my question is to Professor Dejani. So of course, I agree with of your sentiment and much of what you're saying, the sort of need for reconciliation. Last night I spoke about the teachings of Emmanuel Levinas, who speaks about our ethical need to see ourselves in the other, and that we need the other to be human. And I think this is the best of Jewish ethics and Muslim ethics and Christian ethics and ethics in general, the need to respect the other, not to want to change the other. So how do we, Professor Dejani, how do we, I guess, marginalize the Muslim Brotherhood, which, as Professor Patterson shows, and I think a lot of our work at ISGAP shows, the connection between European genocidal anti-Semitism and the Muslim Brotherhood, which was imported to the region roughly 100 years ago. I think you can make, Professor Bassam Tibi makes the argument that that's the time when anti-Semitism was introduced to the Islamic world. There was discrimination against Jews in the Islamic world, but not anti-Semitism. And I subscribe to Tibi's argument in that way. So how do we develop policies and separate the legitimate needs and rights of Palestinians, but then marginalize the more reactionary forces that are using anti-Semitism in their politics locally, and doing, I think, a very effective job of exporting it back to the West, back to the, the SJP and the sort of BDS movement, which is being infused, I would argue, with anti-Semitism and Muslim Brotherhood ideology. So how do we separate it? How do we get rid of these reactionary, hateful forces and then pursue a space of reconciliation and God willing, some peace? What do we do?
When Plato was very disappointed at the Athenian democracy for his murdering his professor, his teacher, his intellectual guide, Socrates, he did not blame democracy, he blamed the ignorance of the people of democracy, and that's why he started the academia. Similarly, when in the United States, democracy also was on the verge, we find that John Dewey came and wrote his famous book about democracy and education. And I believe that education is the major role, plays a major role, but education, not like Barry Wise wrote this book, it says how to fight anti-Semitism. But we have to go beyond that. We have to go beyond writing books and beyond correcting and criticizing the curriculum. Because if you correct the curriculum and make it a peace education, but the teacher does not believe in that peace education, and he walks into the classroom, the curriculum goes out of the door, and he will speak anti-democratic or anti-peace. And that's where I believe that we need to promote reconciliation and peace and interfaith dialogue within the university level. Now we have been talking about it to be bottom up, to go to schools and teach, but I believe it's from top bottom, in the sense that we have to educate elites into becoming PhD scholars in reconciliation, in interfaith, in empathy, and then have them spread within the Arab world, in the sense that not a single university used to teach or have a course on moderation, on reconciliation. And not a single Arab university has a degree in reconciliation that's why we have started this program in Europa University about trying to get students there to study on the PhD level about reconciliation, about empathy, about interfaith dialogue, and then go back to their universities, to their schools, to their community with that message. And I feel that in education and in building up a bridge between Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, and what I mean is to focus on fighting the ideology of Hamas, fighting the ideology of Muslim Brotherhood with the ideology of Wasatiyah, because you cannot fight them. You won the war physically against ISIS, but the ideology is there. So we have to fight an ideology with an ideology. And the ideology of Wasatiyah is the ideology of true Islam. And, you know, there are 2 billion Muslims, and you focus on what 50,000 Muslim, 100,000 Muslim says, and forget the millions who believe in moderation, who believe in wasatiyah, who are not anti-Jewish, who are not anti-Semitic. But Hamas and Muslim Brotherhood are using education and social networks in order to teach them that. And that's our battle. That's what we should fight. And that's what the role of universities should do, to focus on these specialties and try to be able to promote within the culture, to change the culture from a conflict culture to a peace culture.
Yeah, you want to say something? Yeah, okay, and thank you very much, Mohammed. David or Joel, do you want to address this at all? And then Haris Rafiq is here and he'd like to say something.
No, I appreciate Professor Dajani's remarks, and in my own experience with interfaith dialogue between Christians and Jews, Christians, Jews, and Muslims, you know, I know what the challenges are. As you say, education is a tall order. Dialogue requires learning, understanding, work, trust, time, patience. We can't just sit down today, okay, let's have a dialogue. It has to be cultivated, in my experience, over, you know, with perseverance and patience and courage over time. And I think Professor Dajani is an excellent example of that.
Okay, thank you. So we have here Haris Rafiq, who is one of the founders of the Quilliam Foundation, who's now affiliated to ISGAP, and he's at Pembroke College with us, and he has a comment or a question.
Thank you, Charles.
He has to do it through your computer, Charles.
Oh, okay. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Just a few things. I wanted to just make some comments on what we've heard so far. The first thing is that I absolutely agree with the last speaker, with Professor Dajani, that we have to fight an ideology with an ideology, and the ideology is the moderate middle way. And to me, that is traditional classical Islam in its essence. But it's not just about education. I think it's gone too far. And I just want to relate that back to the first speaker, where we talked about, sorry, the second speaker, who talked about al-Banna and Husseini learned from Hitler about propaganda and PR. And propaganda, not for the sake of education and giving people information, but to actually push forward a particular point of view, and that was that Jews are responsible for all the evils of the world and the hatred of Jews. So I think what we need to do is focus on combating the ideology of, and it's not just Muslim Brotherhood, and it's not just Hamas anymore. Sadly, I've been tracking for the last few years the radicalization of the people who are on the middle way, the Wasatiyah. Unfortunately, the Barelwis, the Sufis, the traditions that I come from, and if you look recently at the incidents in the UK during the conflict, the recent conflict, the overwhelming majority of people that were being anti-Semitic were people who probably weren't anti-Semitic in their actions 5 or 10 years ago, and that was the Barelwis, the Al-Hikmah Trust, and many others. People who actually drove down in the convoys and said all of those things are people who were, and they believe, in their opinion, follow the middle way, the way of moderation. So it's not just Islamism, and it's not just Hamas and Muslim Brotherhood anymore and Jamaat Islami. It is sadly the infiltration of these ideas into the people of the middle way, and it's not through education, it's through combating the ideology by providing alternative narratives. So that's number one. I think interfaith has a place, but sadly for me, most of the people that have been involved in interfaith, either here or the UK over the last 10, 15 years, I can only count a few of them left that haven't been anti-Semitic during the recent conflict. So that's the first thing. The second thing I just wanted to highlight was that I've been saying, I said this in Jerusalem a couple of times last week, and I've been saying it for the last 5 years, or more than that, actually, I've been saying it for the last 10 years. I think we have to move on from using the word Islamophobia. We must stop using it for two main reasons. One is a side reason, and that is that the word Islamophobia has been constructed, and the narratives around the terminology has been used by extremist and tribal Muslims who feel the victim mentality to deflect legitimate criticism of certain particular interpretations and ideas. I've been called Islamophobic. I'm so that the professor has been called, in inverted commas, Islamophobic. That's one reason. The other reason is that we live in liberal secular democracies, and every time, my apologies for this if you've heard this before, but every time I hear the word, I feel compelled that I need to explain this. We live in the UK, in the US, and around the world in liberal secular democracies, and Islam is a set of ideas, a set of values that I choose to belong to, adhere to a certain interpretation. In a liberal secular democracy, no set of ideas or values, even if they are values or ideas that I believe in, should be beyond critique or beyond criticism or even satire, ridicule. However, no individual is beneath dignity. So we use the term anti-Muslim hatred or anti-Muslim bigotry. And I just want to go back to the original, the first speaker of this session, where explained it very, very well. Anti-Judaism versus anti-Semitism. If somebody, a Muslim, Christian, atheist, whatever, in my view, wants to critique Islam or even Judaism as a faith through a rational process, that is okay, and we can have discussions and debates and choose to disagree. But it's only when the hatred is against an individual for who he or she is or what they practice, that is then relevant, and it's anti-Semitic. In the case of it's towards somebody, against somebody who's Jewish, and anti-Muslim hatred if it's towards somebody who happens to be a Muslim. So I think these two things are very, very important. And the final thing I will say is that in terms of, I just like the professor, I have ijazas in Shafi and Hanafi fiqh, and there are many hadiths that in Sahih Bukhari and Sahih Muslim, that I perhaps could easily sit down with somebody if I had the time, the inclination, and a person that I wanted to talk to, or who's ready to actually accept what I had to say, could say that certain hadiths are fabrications or whatever. But the problem is that the overwhelming majority of Muslims are sadly following their charismatic leaders like sheep. So I think it would be a bad tactic, and we tried this in the past and it didn't work, a bad tactic to actually say to Muslims that don't for example, don't believe in the hadith that Hamas quotes in their charter because it's a fabrication. They just won't accept it. Their egos, their ignorance, their pride, arrogance, all of these things will not accept that argument. Rather, what I think is more beneficial is to try to explain why those hadiths interpretations by people like Hamas are problematic. And the Hamas one, for example, where they say, oh, Abdullah, there's a Jew hiding behind this rock, and the end times won't come until that happens. And the rock will say, there's a Jew hiding behind here, and the Muslim army will kill the Jew, etc. The overwhelming majority of Muslims believe that to be true, but there are different ways of interpreting that as per traditional classic Islam, which don't mean the same thing that Hamas do. And I'll stop there.
Cool. Thank you. Thank you, Harris. So I see there's does any of the speakers like to respond to Harris, or should we go to more questions? Mohammed, David, Joel, do you want to say anything? Okay, so I see that Volker Beck has his hand up, so the floor is yours, Volker.
I have only two remarks. One remark to the marvelous speech of Joël Kotek. I would argue your first point that anti-Judaism of the early anti-Judaism is attacking or condemns Jews for what they are, because already what you read in the letters of St. Paul or in the evangelical scriptures is always a conception of Judaism which is narrowing Judaism to certain aspects, and the pattern is always it was told to you and I'm telling you now liberty, freedom, love, and not law and narrowness of scriptures. So I think the evil starts a little bit earlier, or even the first time is not so unproblematic. And if you go to fathers of the church like Saint Justine, that he says, you see, by losing the state for the Jews, God showed to the people that now the new boundary is with the Christian church and not anymore with the Jewish people. So it's from the starting point, and perhaps it's something if religions are coming up in succession, it is perhaps even a little bit inevitable. But if you start a new religion, you tell the old one is lost his power, its truth, or whatever, because we have the same phenomenon with Islam towards Judaism and Christianism in the even in the early interpretations where there's not already Islamic hate against, special hate against Jews. So this was my first remark. The second remark is to Mr. Dajani, and I totally agree that there is a difference of true hatred and criticism of occupation. But not every aspect of occupation is illegal, and not every criticism of settlements, etc., is acceptable. And I think there is also a lot of bias in the discussion what international law tells about the conflict. I'm not somebody who endorses Netanyahu and the old government of Israel, etc. But I think in some criticisms, what means in international law in the conflict, the people are often too fast to condemn certain actions and call them illegal, etc. Because the occupation in itself, per se, is not illegal, because Israel was aggressed, Israel won, and afterwards there was occupied territory, and you have to handle it. There are international frameworks of legislation how to handle occupied territory after a conflict, but the occupation in itself never is illegal. There can be illegal acts by the occupier, but this is a different thing. And I think we should be very precise on talking about the conflict if we want to differ between anti-Semitism and political criticism and discussion. Then we also have to use the tools of international law in a differentiated manner. Thank you.
Thank you, Volker. We're actually out of time, but I want to ask, I see Chris has his hand up for a long time. I didn't let him ask a question earlier. So Chris, could you please ask a very concise question, and then we'll let the speakers respond to all the comments. Chris, you're unmute.
Yeah, okay. I just want to say, like very quickly, I think what I see in the last 10, 15 years, I'm living now 20, let's say, close to 30 years outside of Germany, so I see the German society from a very critical point of view. And also from the UK perspective, from the French perspective, and from the Greek perspective. Okay, so I have a really international perspective. And what I'm seeing is like a very pathological, let's say, handling of the Holocaust and all these things. But that's one thing. The other thing is, that was to the previous question, it's a session. What I see nowadays, if you teach, let's say, Israel, let's say the Middle East and all that, what you will encounter in the classroom is a very anti-Zionist, anti-Israel, let's say, how can I say, attitude by the students. Yeah. And
Sorry,
I
Chris,
wouldn't say,
Chris, can you please focus on your question? I'm sorry to cut you.
I wouldn't say that this is, let's say, highly anti-Semitic, but this is, I'm stating, you know, that this is like the typical, like Robin Hood attitude, you know, like we are siding with, it's not really a question, I'm just saying a statement, you know, like in Greece, people are siding with the underdogs against basically the, let's say, guys that dominate the scenario. Yeah, that's all I wanted to say. That's the attitude nowadays in the classroom.
Thank you very much, Chris. So a lot of time was given to the questions and speakers. So I would like to very quickly give each speaker at least a moment to respond to the comments or to contribute any further closing remarks. So Professor Dejani first, then David, and then Joel.
Well, when I hear someone says that occupation is not evil, we part ways. This morning, I went with my brother, and all occupation is not moral. This morning, I went with my brother for an errand that could have taken us 5 minutes. It took us 3 hours. This is occupation. And unless you are living it, you don't understand it. You don't believe it. The other point I would like to make is that in Islam, there are 2 sources. One is the main source, which is the Quran, and the other is the Hadith and the Sirah Nabawiyya. And the third is a minor also, which is scholars and theologians. But the Quran is the main source. Now, the Hadith, there are many Hadith which are weak, they call them, or fabrication, only because if they contradict the Quran, because the Quran is the major core source. Now, if there is a hadith that contradicts what has come in the Quran, what has been stated in the Quran, or if it is not mentioned even in the Quran, then it is not a true hadith, because the hadith was not collected during the life of the Prophet, but 150 years later. And the reason for that is the Prophet did not allow it to be collected so that it's not mixed with the Quran. And the Prophet himself has said, if a hadith contradicts the Quran, a verse in the Quran, then it is not true. Don't attribute it to me. And so this is where this verse from Hamas contradicts the Quran. And there are other verses, or other hadith by Bukhari, which are anti-Jewish and promotes anti-Semitism, yet they are contradictory to the Quran, and that's why they are rejected. They are being rejected not because of anything, but because they are against the Quran, against what the Quran has said. And that's basically the criteria through which we should mention. The Quran is not anti-Semitic, is not anti-Jewish, and even there are Jewish scholars who misinterpret verses in the Quran, like the one also about apes and monkeys and pigs, which does not describe Jews, but it says the Sabbath breakers, God made them apes, not necessarily Jews. And so in this way, it is how you interpret the text. You can interpret it one way, or you can interpret it the other way. You can interpret it in anti-Semitic, and you can interpret it in a much faithful way. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. David, very quickly, please.
Yeah, well, Professor Dejani, I appreciate that, and Joel as well. I mean, both of you have laid out examples of the appropriation of the word, which is one of the 3 pillars of anti-Semitism, which I could discuss another time. But the Jew hatred entails the appropriation of the word of truth, so that you introduce a new holy word. And this leads to a charged discourse. It's not just a question of education, it's a question of discourse. When you have Jews Jewish scholars denouncing Israel, an apartheid state guilty of crimes against humanity, the discourse has gone off the rails. Also following the discourse of someone like Sayyid Qutb is not just about Quran, it's about the discourse of Sayyid Qutb, right? And we can, yes, Sayyid Qutb, like many others, will exploit the Holy Scripture for his own agenda. We see that in all the traditions. But knowing that it's being exploited shouldn't deflect us from what I would say is the evil of the Qutbism, okay? Anyway, it's a huge topic. I just want to thank my colleagues and everyone here. That's all I have for the moment. Thanks.
Thank you very much, David. Joel, the final word briefly, please.
So thanks for the remark of Professor Gassenschmidt, but I think in certain ways right, on the other way is not, because I think you should make a difference between anti-Judaism and anti-Semitism, and it helps us to explain the fact that maybe Quran is not anti-Semitic, but it has part of anti-Judaism, because by definition, you know, the father of Christianity and the father of Islam had to destroy. It means Judaism as such, and of course to reinterpret it in a very negative way. And of course, during the early time of Christianity, there were, you know, speeches and they were, you know, saying against Judaism, but it's against Judaism. And of course, you can quote John Chrysostom, who compared, you know, the synagogue with the brothel, etc. But there is a difference. There is, after the Crusade, you can see a huge difference. There were no huge massacre before, you know, the Crusades, etc. So I think we should consider, and I think we should insist about the difference between anti-Judaism, which focused against the religion as such, and anti-Semitism, which considered the Jews, it means the people, as the responsible of the evil of the world.
Okay, so thank you, Joel and David and Mohammed. Thank you very much for a very powerful, important session. Unfortunately, we don't have much more time, but this could have gone on for a lot longer. So thank you, the three of you, for being with us. We really appreciate it. And just very briefly, we have a 1 hour break. So some of us in Israel, Europe, and the UK, we're gonna break for a quick dinner. Please come back on time in about 50 minutes. We're gonna have another panel, a very important panel with Rami Aziz, Benny Morris, and Uzi Rabi. So it's a very packed day.